Hello, and welcome to this virtual Fireside Chat as part of the OneWorld Summit from CAE. My name is Aaron Mehta. I am Deputy Editor and Pentagon Correspondent with Defense News, leading trade publication based out of DC. Very excited to be here with Dan Gelston. Dan is the relatively new Group President for CAE Defense. Dan joined CAE in last August, which was certainly an interesting time to be joining any company, but particularly one like CAE, which deals obviously with a lot of simulation and virtual work at a time when a lot of that is becoming a little bit more popular. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you, Aaron. Great to be with you.
So I want to start with maybe a big picture question. Again, relatively fresh set of eyes. You've been here for a couple of months now. What's your take on CAE's, from the defense perspective, kind of strength in the market, and where do you think the company needs to be looking to grow in the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, great question. So obviously I had known CAE quite well, 70 years of I think, world leading training and simulation experience, and particularly a global pure play. I think the leader around the globe in training and simulation, and very uniquely positioned, particularly when you understand the national defense strategy of 2018 and the pivot that we're seeing in the US and our allies from fighting an asymmetric fight, which we're actually engaged in every day, and many days bullets are flying and you're getting those real world lessons, to one of a peer versus peer scenario, referred to as CRICT many times: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, terrorism, the fifth. So hopefully we won't actually be engaging in live fire. We won't actually be fighting a China or a Russia anytime soon, but we still need to be ready. How do we have our forces as ready as possible without that real world experience? So certainly that comes in the form of training, and not only training, but training in a multi-domain operation environment, one that the National Defense Strategy and our leaders continue to push upon. So space, air, land, sea, kind of wrapped in cyber. So these 5 tiers, these 5 domains. That's a particular challenge to do in a timely manner with real world assets, getting Air Force and Space Command and Army and Navy all together to train as continually as you would like to be prepared for a peer versus peer contest, which could potentially happen at any time. Now, you don't necessarily have the time to do that or the dollars to do that. So that doesn't mean just training in a multi-domain environment, but it probably means a lot of simulation in a multi-domain environment. And that's relatively new, a networked versus platform-centric, virtual reality enhanced multi-domain training environment. It's what is going to be necessary to keep our troops ready in that multi-domain environment, to be able to do it cost effectively and at a pacing, every 6 months. I'm an old Army guy, in between your National Training Center, your NTC rotation, something to that effect. It really is going to be in that synthetic training simulated environment. And I think there's no better company to provide those necessary products and services to our primary customers, defense and security in the United States and globally and its allies, than CAE. And over the next 18 months, I think you're going to see an acceleration of this as we anticipate a changeover in administration in the United States. I think there'll be a continued focus, particularly with the China challenge and problem set. Russia, of course, right there next to them. And learning how to move from a platform-centric, big simulators on hydraulic stilts that train individual pilots or individual tank commanders, to one that is truly networked. It's more portable, it's more affordable, it's faster, it's better, it's cheaper, and it's all networked together, so we can train in this totality where you have either simulated or real space assets and air assets and ground and sea assets all coming together for those training and those decision makers to understand their capabilities, how they work together, and then work through their decision trees, their OODA loops, whatever it may be, at whatever echelon those decision makers are involved in to make the best execution decisions possible to keep our forces at the ready for this peer versus peer challenge that we face.
So that raises maybe a good place to start then is, what's the difference from CAE's perspective with experience in simulation training in terms of how you train and simulate a great power competition versus what we've really been dealing with the last 20 years, which is primarily Middle East, lower level conflicts, where you get a lot of kind of, dealing with terrorism or smaller insurgency groups?
Certainly. It was interesting. The last time I was really directly involved in training as a full-time occupation, I was in uniform back in Fort Knox. I was an armor guy about tanks, Bradley's, Humvees, about to switch over to intelligence. And of course, prior to 2001, it was that really that bipolar world. We were still training the Russia versus United States, the Krasnovians, the great planes in Europe, where we'd have a force-on-force context. September 11th happened, and I saw this massive shift. We moved away from peer versus peer to an asymmetric fight. How do you fight someone who maybe isn't necessarily a large power or a sophisticated power, have assets, but is embedded in their communities, whether it's the mountains of Afghanistan or it's the urban areas of Iraq, it's bombings, it's civilian personnel, it's collateral damage. I ended up moving into that quite heavily in the counterterrorism intel world after. That certainly is a different set. And I think the training for that really was driven by a lot of that real world experience we were having every single day, because we moved pretty quickly into engagement. Obviously, October of that year, we moved into Afghanistan, and then invasion of Iraq, March of '03. The shift coming back to a peer versus peer, a China or a Russia, it's quite a bit different, because you have the multi-domain environment. You didn't necessarily have contest with an asymmetric threat in space. I would say even in air. You certainly had it primarily on the ground, pretty limited at sea. Yeah, there was certainly some issues, piracy and the like at sea. But you're really dealing with two domains, one primarily. Now we're dealing with all five. And in some areas, these peer threats may be even more advanced than us in space and in cyber attacks. So it's bringing all of that together in a training environment, whereas before you could just train with your land forces, clearing buildings, if you will. And certainly a lot of training was happening there, even moving into virtual reality. But as your individual special operations team, or a platoon of infantry, or dismounted Cav scouts, something to that effect. Now we're trying to figure out how to train in totality, where there are space assets actively involved in the targeting. There's hypersonic weapons once targeted that are going to launch in a matter of seconds, maybe impacting your ship in the middle of the Pacific somewhere. Certainly there's still the land components, as your dismounts are getting off ships onto islands or onto mainlands. You've got cyber involved. I mean, certainly there wasn't a major cyber threat coming from a lot of these asymmetric terrorist groups, but China and Russia have proven, their capabilities there. So how do you take that all together? Because you've got to train how you fight. And of course, the more you train, the less you bleed. I mean, that's an old adage that I'm sure you've heard before, and it's absolutely true. And I believe in this quite particularly, seeing I've got so many brethren still in the armed forces and security networks and intelligence as well. So being able to help provide our defense forces that totality, and many times it's going to really lean on digital immersion to give them an experience where they can potentially have to react to contests in space, in air, in land, in sea, and cyber, all coming at them at once in a coordinated fashion. That's something we really haven't had to deal with for the last 20 years. And these potential peer adversaries who haven't been as engaged in that asymmetric fight have had the luxury of sitting back and watching how the US and its allies conducted the asymmetric fight, gain the intelligence, look at how they can convert maybe some of our differentiators, some of our greatest strengths in combat into weaknesses, such as reliance on frontline communications. And then how do they target that even from space and from air and convert that into a weakness? And then of course, if you put in hypersonic weapons, then not only does the targeting happen, but you may be blown up in a matter of seconds, as we've seen particularly with Russia. So that capability, I think, is absolutely key to preparing our forces. It's very different from the asymmetric fight. It is immediate, but right now it's not real yet. So we need to train and more importantly, train in this synthetic simulated environment so we can do it at the pace and the cost that is realistic for our forces to be ready.
So I think you said the word space about a dozen times that answer. So that might be the answer to my next question, which is, what are the kind of specific areas that you think are going to be growing the next couple of years, kind of again in the great power competition? It sounds like space and cyber simulation for CAE is going to be a big part going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was Donald Rumsfeld that said, you fight the next war with the previous war's technology. And in some ways, we are playing catch up to these potential near-peer threats that have had that luxury of looking at our asymmetric fight for 20 years, picking it apart, finding weaknesses. And I think they really have focused on space and cyber. And we're seeing the impact of that, particularly on the cyber front. Not surprisingly, as a training company, we were helping train the US and the allies in the fight they were in. So we were very focused, particularly on the air tier, predominantly the air tier, sea and land as well. But when I look at the capabilities of my company, and I understand where the customer needs to be, and the customer needs to be prepared, the US Defense Forces and its allies, I think it's a real focus on space and cyber, not only for that customer, but also for CAE. And those are areas that we need to augment our capabilities to make sure that we're providing the best product, the best service to help our customers in a rather important mission they have, and that's that mission readiness.
Obviously, a lot of your work is defense specific. Security is also part of that. Should you expect to be going after projects from Homeland Security or NASA, given this focus you talked about with space and cyber already?
Yeah, I can't agree more. We like to say we need more S in DNS with my business. Obviously, it's defense and security. We've predominantly been defense, but security, because it's an integrated readiness position, it's an integrated fight as we move forward. And as we see with space assets ability to target, with cyber assets ability to attack anywhere and everywhere, it's not just the Pentagon, as you pointed out. It's critical infrastructure. It's a lot of what we traditionally have separated into DHS. So that security element is crucial. So that's an area where I'm really looking at expanding, again, more S in the DNS for CAE. In fact, we're bidding a multi-$100 million opportunity with TSA here in the next few months to hopefully end up being their provider of choice for training, the real training systems integrator for their frontline forces at airports and the like in the transportation sector, which having come previously from an experience in that sector, having TSA as my largest customer, I'm excited about that opportunity. And I think we could really bring a lot of our research and development, our capabilities in machine learning and AI and virtual reality and augmented learning management systems, which hopefully we'll get a chance to chat about, bring that capability to DHS, which probably has been you could categorize a little more of a traditional time-phased approach to training. I think we can give them a much more adaptive solution. And certainly we can be attacked, space, cyber, terrorism, we've been focused on, but now these near-peer threats anywhere in our infrastructure space. And I think we can really bring something to bear to DHS and those security-related agencies.
Aside from the DHS contract, are there maybe 3 or 4 big contracts that you're targeting in the next year, 18 months that you can talk about?
Yeah, certainly we're excited about the future, and a lot of that future is next generation platforms. As we've talked about, CAE has a lot of legacy strength in legacy platforms, C-130, the KC-135, we've just talked about with recent wins. But these next generation platforms, these 5th gen and 6th gen, are something that we need to be preparing for now to make sure that we've got the best training solution, both product and services, for when these next generation platforms come available. And that is a very accelerated time frame. So I think of examples like future vertical lift, F-35 for a 5th generation, 6th generation NGAD in the airspace. Our new UAVs, MQ-9B, for instance, both here in the US and internationally, particularly F-35 and the MQ-9B. And some of these are classified, but with the accelerated time frame that our acquisition officials are pursuing to ensure we are prepared for this potential peer versus peer threat, not only are we talking about consolidated timeframes, and if you've been tracking NGAD, you know, a shockingly surprising quick flight of that 6th generation platform. Yeah. which is fantastic. I mean, I think it is a new paradigm in defense acquisition and absolutely necessary. But in order to get there, our defense acquisition officials are really looking for skin in the game from industry. We don't have the time for the classic cost plus development work, years and years and multiple phases. These things are moving very quickly, and that requires a lot of research and development dollars. It requires a lot of engineering time. No company, even the big OEMs, have unlimited research and development budgets. No company, even to Lockheed Martin, has unlimited engineering assets. So if I can partner with these OEMs on these major next generation platforms now and start co-developing as they develop the platform, I'm co-developing the training and the simulation experience and sharing some of that burden, adding skin into the game for research and development, engineering, because it's not just money, it's also time. Time arguably right now is our biggest enemy. I can really help those OEMs and give them a true discriminator in their offering. And certainly at the end, that international or US customer is going to be much better off as they've got a fully baked, fully integrated training and simulation solution with that new platform. And if you think of things like UAVs, most of these new platforms at air tier, and many in ground and sea as well, are going to have manned and unmanned options. So you've got the ability to actually train and get fully certified as a pilot for UAVs, for instance, with 0 flight hours on the actual platform. It's purely in the simulators. And again, that speaks to speed, that speaks to cost. And I think those kind of solutions are exactly what we can provide the end customer and these OEMs as we move forward in a very rapid pace. And I think that'll only continue for next generation platforms. It's critical for the customers. I think it's critical for my business. I mean, C-130 is a phenomenal platform. 135s are a fantastic platform, but they won't be around forever and for good reason.
So we have a couple more minutes here. I want to try to hit a couple of things. The first is obviously, as you mentioned, we have a new administration here in the US, and the expectation, even if the old administration had won a second term, was that defense spending would be flat. Now there's an expectation that it'll be flat, potentially come down over the next 4 years. Similarly, we know that because of COVID, international partners abroad are also cutting defense budgets, in some cases very dramatically. So how does CAE kind of position itself to work with the fact that, again, best case scenario everyone agrees is defense spending stays flat, more realistically across the globe, it's coming down?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, certainly as the largest portion of most countries' discretionary budget, and that is defense, we're going to have to pay the COVID bill. And if defense is the largest portion of that discretionary budget, you can imagine it is going to be one of these bill payers for COVID. And as you said, I think regardless of the administration, that is a reality, both in US and then of course internationally. I mean, you're traditionally looking at 1.5 to about 3 points of GDP spent on defense. I'm expecting, we all kind of had seen this year as the high watermark for defense spending. Typically, I think most analysts are saying a 3 to 5% cut here in the next couple of years to U.S. defense spending, and probably something at a minimum similar to most of our allies. I hearken back to my old Army tanker days. Back in the 90s, I was up on the DMZ, the most forward deployed armored cavalry unit in the Army back at that time. And when there was that budget crunch under the Clinton years, what did we do? We moved from live platforms with live ammunition and real gasoline and MREs to eat out in the field and all the rest of that logistics trail to the simulators. It's just a reality of that cost nature, that time nature. And I think now these simulators are so much better, and you've got the ability of augmented and virtual reality to really give a trainee digital immersion, full sensory immersion. Everywhere they look, they're in the environment. If it's augmented reality, they're looking down and seeing actual controls of the plane, but then when they look up with their goggles, they're seeing enemy fighters coming at them. So you almost get that incredible mix of sensory immersion, both real and virtual. That's exciting for me, and I think with the realities of this budget crunch and COVID, we knew it was coming. It's only been accelerated, and COVID's not over. I mean, we saw again an acceleration of providing these digital and cloud enhanced virtual reality solutions coming. COVID made it happen faster. There was a limitation on the amount of instructors you could provide. So we started offering remote instruction with this capability of cloud-based training. Trainees were in quarantine. Maybe you're sitting in the BOQs for the first 2 weeks of your training cycle. Well, you're not going to have any more time in that training cycle. Well, what do you do with those 2 weeks? Well, we were able to provide virtual reality, things from goggles to iPads, and actually bring the training to the trainees sitting there in their hotel room while they're quarantined from everybody else for COVID. So these things, I don't really see that going away. I only see that acceleration that has come here to stay, and I think we're uniquely positioned in many parts, thanks to Mark Parent, my CEO, who back in 2018 saw the need for this better, faster, cheaper digital immersion simulation and training, and committed to investing $1 billion in our digital immersion capabilities. So I'm really able to leverage a couple of years of major investment here. And we'll talk, I'm sure, more over the week for platforms like Trax and our Rise learning capability that really came out of that. And now we're reaping the benefits of having the right product and the right service at the right time, particularly understanding COVID in the budget environment.
Yeah, clearly COVID has changed a lot of things. We can tell that simply from the fact that we're doing this via web.
Yeah, you're about 2 inches tall right now in my little iPhone screen. I hope hope next year's OneWorld will do this in person.
Let's hope. I want to ask one last one. We have just a couple minutes here. CAE's parent company, not just the defense sector, obviously, recently raised capital through a public offering. There was some work with some stock. And also the big corporate CAE has purchased a couple of smaller civil aviation companies. I wonder if we should expect any sort of M&A activity on the defense side. Is there any sort of capability or company that the defense side might be targeting for acquisition in the coming, again, 18, 24 months?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. Obviously, we alerted the street that potentially would raise up to 2 billion Canadian, and that is dry powder to make sure that we're coming out, leaning forward out of the COVID crisis. We don't want to be hunkering down, just trying to survive. We want to take advantage of this, and I think we're in a position where we can really do so. Certainly the first couple of acquisitions were on the commercial side. Nick's business, tremendous business, training airline pilots. And of course, he's a leading indicator before they can really start flying in mass again. They're going to have to be training with Nick and CAE's commercial business. And you see that consolidation there, which I think was fantastic. Right now, the defense portfolio makes up approximately 40% of CAE's revenues. So if Nick and I are the two major arms, and of course healthcare being a bit smaller, a little bit smaller than Nick, but I see certainly a much bigger ocean to potentially address, a much larger addressable market, having all of defense and security available to me. So certainly defense and potential M&A is on the radar. Difficult to talk about in any detail, obviously. I would like to, I certainly would like to think in the next 18 to 24 months, a property that would come along that's particularly attractive to me. And again, if I think of the multi-domain environment that the customer set needs right now and capability to train them in all 5 tiers. We kind of talked cyber and space being those newer areas, and particularly with cyber being prevalent across the board, to defense, to security, to banking, to you name it, critical infrastructure. Those would be areas I'd be particularly interested in maybe augmenting our capability. We've got a great cyber capability. It's really cyber defense focused for our own platforms. In fact, we won an award for KC 135 and our cyber capability with those platforms. I think it led to our great win here recently on that recompete. But I'd love to get a little more robust training capability in the cyber realm, besides just cyber defense, cyber training for defense and security. And that's an area that I can certainly see augmenting with potential acquisition here in the next 18 to 24 months. If the right property comes along, I think would be positioned to potentially pursue that.
All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for the time. I think everyone here has probably learned a lot from this conversation. Appreciate it and hope the rest of the conference goes well.
Fantastic, Aaron. I really appreciate your time, and good to do this e-interview. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.